It is Passion Sunday. So we are entering the final stretch of Lent 2025. And I hope your Lent has been fruitful or has at least, if not as successful as you might think in a more normal way of measuring such things, at least helped reveal some predominant faults in your life that you can then strive to address. I have for you two, maybe three short things to go over. On Sundays, sometimes on Saturdays, we like to save letters from priests and bishops and things because Sundays tend to be a little more casual. So we're going to go first to something published by or written by Father Donald Closter. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. We just go with it. But he sent a copy to me. He also sent a copy to LifeSite and a few other places. And he just about to hear a story about how a priest was essentially silenced temporarily because he dared to tell the truth in a homily. And now I guess he has no cares left to give, as they say, because here he has an article completely upending what the bishops are arguing about immigration. So LifeSite published this just a couple of days ago under the headline, Catholic Priest, No One Has the Right to Violate Another Country's Immigration Laws. Just laws on legal immigration may never be broken from a moral perspective. No one has a right to violate the boundaries established by a foreign sovereign nation. Again, he sent me a copy of this. He also sent this to several other outlets. Here's what he has to say. This is an interesting story in this letter, as you will hear. There has been huge pushback after the few times I have addressed the important topic of immigration from the pulpit. I recall giving a sermon on illegal immigration in early 2019 at a parish in the Diocese of Bridgeport, Connecticut. After one of the masses, a Novus Ordo in Spanish, a woman screamed at me in the vestibule as I was seeing off parishioners. Her insults were flying in Spanish, and I was providentially keeping my composure. This exchange led the pastor at the time to ask me not to give any more sermons for, quote, a few weeks. To the local bishop's credit, he told me that pastors did not have that authority. The pastor ended up going out of town over a weekend a few weeks after the incident and told me I could preach if the content was not controversial. I would submit that the whole of the gospel is controversial. But as it turned out, the woman in question, in her 50s, was divorced and living outside of the sacrament of holy matrimony with a Mexican national in his 50s who was also divorced, and here in the United States illegally. Furthermore, her live in boyfriend was not a practicing Catholic and did not attend church anywhere. It has been my experience that those who eschew U.S. immigration laws are also willing to ignore ecclesial laws. They neither observe civil nor religious laws. Theirs is a subjective morality of their own preferences. One of the biggest problems in Western society is the lack of our participation in the Sunday precept. When people do not hear the morality and theology of sermons from the pulpit, they begin to make up their own personalized and convenient religion. We also live in a world where people do not have many discussions with well formed consciences within their circle of acquaintances. The fact is that many isolate themselves more and more away from social interactions and counsel. Those living south of the border, in the words of many of my friends living there, tend to view any government as responsible for all the economic shortfalls they may experience. My sermon that day in 2019 was based on my own experience of living as a U.S. citizen in three different countries on three different continents. Can anyone reading this imagine me, as a Catholic priest, walking across any border illegally? My bishop would proverbially have my head. I recall standing in a line in New York trying to straighten out my visa problems with Ecuador. In front of me was a Venezuelan national who was trying to renew his visa. Since there are so many Venezuelans illegally in Ecuador, I asked the man if he had ever entered Ecuador illegally. His eyes widened and he exclaimed, I am a Catholic. I would never disobey the immigration laws of Ecuador. I lived in Switzerland for 2 years, separated by 10, 1980 and 1990. I am one-eighth Swiss and applied for Swiss citizenship but was denied. Talk about strict immigration laws. In the year 2000, I lived in Mexico City for 4 months, hoping the Cardinal Archbishop of Mexico City would give me faculties and an assignment. Had I stayed 2 more months, I would have had to leave and re-enter Mexico to comply with their 100-day 80 visa immigration rule for U.S. citizens. Talk to any illegal in the U.S., and they know not to cross the border and risk deportation or denied entry. From 2011 to 2018, I was the pastor of a large parish in the Archdiocese of Guayaquil, Ecuador. Every 2 years, I had to renew my clergy visa. On the fourth renewal, my bishop agreed to assign me back to the Diocese of Bridgeport. I had only had the visa open for a few months when I returned to the US. After I left, the Ecuadorian National Assembly passed a law retroactively banning anyone from entering their country for 2 years if they left Ecuador on an open visa. In 2019, I was told I was banned for 2 years because my visa was open when I left back for the US, even though I left in 2018 when that was not against the law. Just about any country you could name has stricter immigration laws than we in the United States have had for over several of the most recent decades. St. Thomas Aquinas writes in his Summa that man's relationship with foreigners is either peaceful or hostile. He says that not all immigrants are equal. Every nation has a right to decide which immigrants are peaceful or beneficial to the common good. As a matter of self defense, the state may reject those criminal elements, traitors, enemies, and those deemed harmful or hostile to its citizens. St. Thomas acknowledges that others will want to visit or stay in a given land for some time. Such foreigners must be treated with charity, respect, and courtesy. There have been nearly a worldwide traditional practice of only admitting one as a citizen after 2 or 3 generations. St. Thomas expresses a concern that newly settled foreigners would not quickly have the best grasp of the common good and culture of their host citizens. It jars me to see so many foreign flags at soccer games on our home soil from people who claim they want U.S. citizenship. If the U.S. were playing the Swiss or German teams, I wouldn't dream of taking a Swiss or German flag in a display of opposition to the U.S. I am 1/8 Swiss and half German. The United States has her own immigration laws on the books. If anyone thinks our laws are unjust or unfair, the proper channel is to get the current laws changed. In no way may anyone disregard our current immigration laws. Too many times, illegal immigration advocates act as though they have the right to ignore our laws. Currently, the U.S. allows a little less than 1 million legal immigrants to become citizens each year. That is a huge quantity. It is also a positive compliment to our country that so many want to come here. Ours is the most sought after passport in the world. In the fiscal year of 2023, 1.2 million foreign nationals got green cards and became permanent residents. The problem is that so many more than 1 million per year want to come to the U.S. People immigrate from all over the globe. It is not fair for people to cross our southern and northern borders and effectively jump their turn in line. Everyone should wait their turn, get their papers in order, and do things in a lawful way. Furthermore, illegal immigration puts a heavy strain on our hospitals and social services, so much so that many low-income U.S. citizens have their services curtailed or must wait in long queues behind those who should not be here. Our hospitals and social outreach, especially along the southern border, have been overrun for decades. The question begging for an answer is, why are those in favor of this not holding foreign governments responsible for their own people? In parting, let us never forget a few things from a Catholic perspective. Just laws on legal immigration may never be broken from a moral perspective. No one has a right to violate the boundaries established by a foreign sovereign nation. The Christian ethos has always observed both personal and national land rights. Men of good faith obey just laws domestically and abroad. The content of our character reveals to others what we do in their presence, even when no one is looking. We are all sojourners here on earth and have a right to live freely in the land of our birth or of our citizenship granted through the proper channels. Only in heaven will there be a lack of borders and copious amounts of room to enjoy the triune God in the beatific vision. And you can kind of see in that piece that he is softly calling out the bishops because they are advocating for people breaking laws and violating the church's teaching on this. Aquinas' philosophy and his theology is, on paper, the official theology and philosophy of the Catholic Church. Officially, on paper. Unofficially, at Vatican II, we got the Nouveau Theologie, and Aquinas was pushed to the side. This is that's a spicy kind of soft slap to the bishops to remind them of what their actual duties are in all of this. Now, we can check in here with our good friend, Archbishop Hector Aguirre, who is Francis's old nemesis in Argentina. I've explained who he is numerous times. If you need a refresher, let me know in the comments. I will try to get back to you. LifeSite published this just a couple of days ago under the headline, "Celibacy is not the reason why we're suffering a lack of priestly vocations." Celibacy reveals a profound unity between the mission of the priest and the mission of Christ. The celibate priest gives to the Lord an undivided heart to love everyone as he loves them. I'm always flabbergasted when I see traditionally minded Catholics talk about tossing out priestly celibacy. You're giving into the world's logic, the world's demands. It has never been priestly celibacy. That's the problem. The problem is that culture gone to impurity of heart and mind. We need to root this out in our own lives, in our own hearts. It's wonderful that the Archbishop Emeritus wrote this during the waning days of Lent. What better time is there to fast and do penance, to develop the virtuous habits that will help you root that out in your life than Lent? If you want to deal with the vocations problem, and the problem not mentioned here, Ted McCarrick passed away, the living embodiment of the impurity problem among the priesthood, the evil deeds so many of them did. You don't toss out celibacy. You instill virtue. You start working on virtue among the faithful, and you bar certain kinds of people from being priests. It's an open secret. James Martin types were allowed to be priests. Turned out to be a really, really bad idea. Here's the Archbishop, Pope Francis's old nemesis in Argentina, canceled because, well, we spent 20 years or something correcting and rebuking Jorge Mario Bergoglio in Argentina. And then Jorge Mario Bergoglio became Pope Francis, and the rest is history. Here's his short missive on this. This is a continuation of the last letter I published from him last week. One of the most damaging achievements of the so-called spirit of the council has been the denigration of the church. Forgetting the profession of faith that proclaims her to be holy, it sought to blame her for the division of mankind. Such holiness is not only reflected subjectively in the holiness of so many of her members, but it also shines objectively because she is the body of which Jesus Christ, the God-man, is the head, because she possesses in an infallible and indefectible way the revealed truth and the Eucharist. That is the most holy and source of all holiness, which is communicated in the other sacraments as well. The deviations of those years rejected the absolute character of Christian truth. Pluralistic ideology ignored the words of our Lord that he who is not with me is against me, and he who does not gather with me scatters. The attack on Christian truth, which the church possesses as a grace and communicates with love, is a blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. The spirit of the council implied that any priest who invoked it could do whatever he wanted. Examples in the liturgy. Not only individual bishops, but entire episcopal conferences were allowed to disagree with Rome, as had happened in the case of Humanae Vitae. Texts of neo-Catholic theologians, to give them a name, circulated in the seminaries and among the faculties of theology, leading to great damage that can be statistically proven. Thousands of priests all over the world abandoning the ministry. A situation analogous to that of the first years of the 20th century took place in Srimu Grameke Ecclesia, in the depths of ecclesial life, which St. Pius X described and condemned in Pascendi Dominici Gregis, an encyclical against the movement of modernism. The progressivism of the years of Vatican II, whose repercussions continue to endure, has the same roots. Bishop Gissen of Roermond, a man who remained faithful, pointed out that the church in the Netherlands was distinct from the Roman church. In other words, there were different types of Catholicism. Paul VI of the self-demolition of the church, the house of God into which the smoke of Satan had entered, and of the harsh winter that came instead of the expected spring. The dogmatic, moral, liturgical, and spiritual crisis has become a permanent state. It is no longer a crisis. It is more appropriate to call it a decay. We do not need to invoke the spirit of the council nowadays. There is no need to do so. However, some are advocating another revolution in the church, suggesting that the work of Vatican II was already a revolution. I cannot evaluate the suggestion as anything other than criminal folly. Will we now begin to speak of the spirit of synodality? Some sectors propose giving the church a polyhedral identity to accommodate diverse expressions, alternatives to Catholic unity and its demands. This pretense makes a political movement of the Catholic Church, just like the Peronist movement that has endured for 80 years in Argentine politics, and whose current president seems to be the Roman pontiff. Several authors sounded the alarm a year after the conclusion of the council. Among them was Jacques Maritain, the last Maritain who returned to some of his previous stances. In his magnificent book, The Peasant of the Garonne, an old layman questions himself about the present time. Myths return periodically and take on new value along with other formulations. This is how the church in our day should shudder with joy to be on the move, be the protagonist of the culture of encounter, and place herself on an equal footing with other religions to promote universal fraternity. Even if, as I've already mentioned, the spirit of the council is no longer mentioned. These fallacious, mythologized slogans conceal the opposite and spread confusion among the faithful. In a basic sense, candidates for the priesthood should prepare themselves to live in familiarity with the triune God and forge a special friendship with Jesus, to whom they will one day be conformed in the priesthood. It is a matter of living secundum formum evangeli, according to the form of the gospel. Let us think about the meaning of form in terms of the holomorphic theory. The notion indicates the soul to be grounded in faith, hope, and charity, to attain the spirit of prayer, the vigor of the other virtues, the zeal to win all men for Christ, and of course, to venerate with filial trust the Blessed Virgin, whom the Lord has left us as our mother. Spiritual formation entails an ambition of totality. Nothing must be left half finished. The total exercise of love extends from Christ to the church, which is inseparable from him. As St. Augustine teaches in his commentary on the Gospel of John, one possesses the Holy Spirit to the extent that one loves the church of Christ. What also applies here is growth in fuller maturity associated with the mastery of body and spirit, and as a consequence, the perception and enjoyment of the Evangelii Beatitudinum, the happiness or joy the gospel provides. The priest must be a full man, a master of himself. Self control and maturity are equivalent to stability of mind under the rule of charity, a tempering of character, which will enable the correct use of freedom and a sincere, unreserved pastoral experience. It is important to point out that the concepts of maturity should not be restricted to the psychological dimension alone. Certainly, this must be assured with the help of professional recourse when necessary. But here we are dealing above all with a spiritual realization of the person, of the natural and supernatural order, which includes intelligence, affectivity, will, and the healing dynamism of grace. Who fully reaches this maturity? I think the saints do. The rest of us, at least I myself, are moving towards this goal, at times painstakingly, climbing the hill and advancing gradually. The joy that is proper to hope alleviates fatigue, from which no one is spared, and sustains us in the moments of discouragement. I have known young people who matured at an early age, as well as old people who were fools. The psychologistic reduction of the concept of maturity, which is stripped of a natural and supernatural breadth proper to Christian anthropology, was and still is very frequent. Maturity invites us to think about freedom. The sign of authentic maturity is a healthy and prudent exercise of freedom. The seminary must be a place of formation in freedom and for freedom. Discipline, external order, is indispensable in the seminary, but it must become an internal aptitude, an internal conviction to embrace order for supernatural reasons. Discipline should not be dispensed with, as was done in many places in the crazy post-conciliar years, since it is a necessary. It is the art, method, and rule of the disciple's life, but care must be taken not to reduce it to mere external, pharisaical observances. Today, in some places, it is abused by despotic progressive superiors to silence or crush the spontaneous inclination of numerous seminarians to live in accord with the great ecclesial tradition. They may end up expelled, or having their ordinations canceled, or postponed indefinitely, for being structured and rigid, not fitting the profile, and not being sufficiently pastoral. These are untenable arguments that only speak of ideology, pure and simple. Right now, it is fashionable to wax lyrically about joy, but very little is said about the cross, penance, and mortification. Or rather, there is no talk about them at all. The contagion of successism makes us forget the demands of the gospel, when in reality it is only through acceptance of the gospel that we can attain the beatitude it offers. Many want a Christ without a cross. This is not the first time in church history that people have exploited this distortion of the truth about the Christian life, which expressly contradicts what St. Paul teaches in his letters and what the lives of the saints testify to. In some cases, the old heresies of Gnosticism and Messianianism are reemerging. Through the gift of celibacy, which is at the same time a continuous task, the priest gives to the Lord an undivided heart to love everyone as he loves them. It is necessary to ask for it humbly and always. Those responsible for formation should not be silent about the difficulties the candidates will have to face, but they also should not focus almost exclusively on the dangers. The renunciation of marriage is done for a greater love and with a view to the kingdom of heaven. According to the conciliar documents, there are risks that threaten the priest's chastity, especially in today's society. This was said 60 years ago. What would we have to warn of today after decades of sexual revolution? About a society that so shamelessly displays, through popular individuals, its taste for fornication and even for what is completely unnatural. The question of celibacy is taken up in the Presbyterorum Ordinis. In number 16, we find a very eloquent expression of the value and excellence of celibacy through the use of 5 comparatives. 4 adjectives, 1 adjective. Celibacy is embraced to unite oneself more easily to Christ without competition, to dedicate oneself more readily to the service of God and of men, because one gives oneself more freely to the Lord, and to be more suitable to receive a broader paternity in Christ. If this argument was not necessary in the context of a culture strongly marked by Christianity, despite the fact that there was, excuse me, no shortage of deviations and sins, it has now become necessary to strengthen convictions, overcome doubts, and respond criticism. The theological reasons for priestly celibacy refer to the profound unity between the mission of the priest and the mission of Christ, to raise up a new humanity through the work of the Spirit, and to give life to the universal family of God's children, born not of flesh and blood, but of the divine Spirit. Lately, there's been a new onslaught against what Pius XI called the most precious treasure of the Catholic priesthood. Sorry again. Now we see the mistaken purpose of ordaining married men to the priesthood, meaning the very probati, as an illusory solution to alleviate the absence of vocations in many places. It masks the lack of faith and serves as an expression of the ruin caused by the stubbornness of progressivism. One recent case is that of the German synodal way, as well as the numerous voices on the Synod on Synodality. Although these issues are of different magnitude, allow me to point out the parallelism between the rejection of celibacy of clergy and of church doctrine on birth control. Progressivism also relativizes all the truths of the faith in general. As the encyclical Sacerdotalis Celibitis teaches, a candidate for the priesthood should be directed to help him acquire tranquil, convinced, and free choice of the responsibility he is about to assume. Unfortunately, people do not believe in the celibacy of priests, much less now in our hypersexualized culture. In that document, we read, quote, "None of the real personal and social difficulties which their choice will bring in its train should remain hidden to the young men, so that their enthusiasm will not be superficial and illusory. At the same time, it will be right to highlight with at least equal truth and clarity the sublimity of their choice, which, though it may lead on the one hand to a certain physical and psychic void, nevertheless on the other brings with it an interior richness capable of elevating the person most profoundly." This is a beautiful paragraph of supernatural, of Catholic realism. The correct approach to the question of priestly celibacy requires a broader context: the vindication of the fully human value and beauty of the virtue of chastity, protected by the sixth commandment, "Thou shalt not commit adultery," assumed by the gospel message and clarified by the apostolic writings of the New Testament. The current tendency in many church environments is to silence the Ten Commandments, so well expounded in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, especially to ignore the sixth in both pastoral and catechetical praxis. It is unpleasant to remember that commandment in a society that has naturalized debauchery. In recent years, the case of priests guilty of the abominable crime of doing McCarrick type things to the most young has given rise to new attacks against celibacy. The media is trying to generalize this behavior among clergy, but statistics show that in the vast majority of the cases, more or less 80%, this perversion is recorded in family environments. Another problem not addressed is the spread of the James Martin type among the clergy of some dioceses, with the aggravating circumstance that such people are linked to each other, and the consequences are easy to foresee. With all respect and delicacy, young men should be removed from the path to the priesthood if one can see in them an undeniable impediment. Celibacy requires a full masculinity to freely renounce the beauty and richness of Christian marriage. I've already spoken of another attack, indirect this time, against the value of celibacy: the insistence on sponsoring the ordination of married men, the viri probati, for ideological, pseudo-theological, or pragmatic reasons, such as the scarcity of vocations. There's another reason for this shortage: they already indicate a lack of appreciation for chastity. This problem extends to the family order, to the neglect of instilling conjugal chastity among Christian spouses. Martin Luther, wherever he is, will be rubbing his hands together. In agitating for the need or opportunity to consecrate married men as priests on the basis of a presumed tradition of the primitive church, one very important dimension of the original situation is often omitted, either through ignorance or ideological manipulation. The apostles left everything to follow Jesus. It is not reasonable to think that those who were married took their wives with them. The apostolic tradition indicates that married men who assumed the priestly ministry lived in continence. As an aside, that means no marital activities, even when they lived with their wives under the same roof. This tradition acquired a canonical character in the councils of the early 4th century, beginning with that of Elvira, celebrated between the years 300 and 303, exact date uncertain. Canon 33 prescribed that bishops, priests, and deacons, or all clerics assumed in the ministry, should abstain from their spouses in the begetting of children. Whoever did not do so should be deprived of the honor of the clergy. I have gone to great lengths to deal with this particular question because it reveals the most serious problem of the church today: the ruin and loss of faith, only to be replaced by immanentist postures and social action. This calamity totally contradicts the mission of the risen Lord, entrusted to the apostles, as we read in the final verses of Matthew's Gospel and the appendix of Mark's Gospel. It is surprising that we do not realize how the surreptitious attempt to alter this essential mission of the church leads to her ruin. This is evident in the nations of the old Christendom and proven by statistics. And he ends with a promise for a third part, which we will cover here when the time comes. How many of you knew that? You knew that the church early on ordained married men. But how many of you knew that when they were ordained, they were promised to swear off relations with their spouses? Engaging in marital activities does not prevent evil deeds from happening in the home. It does not. The statistics bear that out. The vast majority of places this happens is in the home. There's something else going on, and allowing priests to engage in these activities is not going to stop McCarrick-type sins from happening. Shawnee says, according to the Eusebius' church history, the only married apostles who were married were Saints Peter and Philip. The others were unmarried. Interesting. I know that some will dispute that, but it's an interesting observation. Traditionalist Catholic says, laughable that critics would blame celibacy for the evil deeds we're talking about. It's like blaming temperance for alcoholism, right? It's why we need to read this also in light of what Pope Pius XII spoke about when he started talking about antiquarianism. Antiquarianism and archaeologism, very similar errors, they basically say, and he defined these as errors, he was calling out those who wanted to return the church to earlier forms of things. He said certain practices were left in the dustbin of history by the church for good reason. One of them was married priests. Just were. And for those of you who pine for Cardinal Robert Sarah to be pope, who also point to the East for married priests, look, it works there. Cardinal Robert Sarah has famously said on the record that he believes the East should abolish married priests, that there should be no married priests even in the East. He kind of was saying that in a way that made it suggest that's what he would do if he was pope, which is probably why Eastern Catholics don't like him all that much. I've seen Eastern Catholics, very faithful people, who will say suddenly that they would go in schism, become Orthodox, if he became pope. This is a touchy issue. Hector Agur planted his flag and said no to moving the line anywhere. He didn't say we'll go after the East or whatever. But if you're looking to embrace activities of the flesh as a solution to the McCarrick problem and the solution to the vocations problem, he said it there himself. If you want to start addressing this problem, first begin with virtue, reiterating what the church teaches about those activities. And second, get the James Martin types out of the priesthood. If you want to know what a good pope needs to do, if we get a good pope and he only really does one thing, he would do that. But to do that would require a lot of other things to be done too. Whoever that pope is, let's say Pope Leo XIV, we'll say. Maybe he'd end up earning the moniker Saint Leo XIV, the great purifier of the church. Palm Sunday's next week. Today is the 5th Sunday of Lent. This is Passion Sunday, ladies and gentlemen. Did I say Palm Sunday at the beginning? If I did, my apologies. I literally was reading something for Palm Sunday to prepare for next Sunday's recording. So Palm Sunday was on the mind. If I said Palm Sunday, it's actually Passion Sunday. What about Anglican married priests? Their valid holy orders are invalid, so who cares about Anglican married priests? They have no valid holy orders. They're not priests. They live action role play as priests. All right, folks. I'm very curious what you have to say about this in the comments, please. Okay, good. Helen Gray says I said passion. Okay, good. I have misspoke many times. I thought that maybe I had misspoken because I do misspeak all the time. It's a flaw of mine that I'm working on. But all right, folks, thanks very much for tuning in today. And please make the most of your Mass today. And I have something later for you on this channel that you might find interesting from Cardinal Burke. So feel free to tune in when that happens. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.